The village of St. Mary Mead had always been a haven of gentle routines. Its cobblestone streets, lined with quaint cottages and blooming gardens, held the quiet hum of lives lived in small, comfortable repetition. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries over white picket fences. Shopkeepers knew every customer by name, and every Sunday, the church bells chimed the same predictable melody. To an outsider, St. Mary Mead seemed like the very picture of peace. But Miss Jane Marple, with her keen, unassuming eyes, had long understood that even the most serene villages harbored secrets, and sometimes deadly ones. On a crisp October morning, Miss Marple sat at her kitchen window, sipping tea and watching the mist curl around the hedgerows. She prided herself on noticing details others overlooked. A slip of paper fluttering in the wind, the faint scuff of a boot along the garden path, or a shadow that lingered where no one should be. Today, however, her attention was drawn to something unusual. A tall man, dressed in a dark overcoat, had appeared near the village square. He was not one of the familiar faces who wandered through St. Mary Mead, delivering letters or carrying baskets from the market. His presence was deliberate, almost predatory, and there was a tension in his posture that made Miss Marple frown. He lingered near the old stone fountain, glancing about as if measuring each passer-by, though he seemed particularly interested in the modest bank that sat at the edge of the square. The villagers, blissfully unaware, continued their routines. Mrs. Peters, the baker's wife, dropped a basket of freshly baked scones as she chatted with the postman. Children chased one another around the fountain, their laughter echoing like a protective charm over the village. Yet Miss Marple's instincts prickled. Something about the stranger's measured, careful observation suggested he was looking for more than directions or idle conversation. "Curious, isn't it?" she murmured to herself, setting down her tea. "Not a face I recognize, and yet he seems familiar somehow, perhaps from a newspaper photograph, or— no matter. We shall see what he intends." The day carried on as usual, but small oddities began to ripple through St. Mary Mead, unnoticed by most. Mr. Thompson, the village grocer, discovered a broken window latch on his back door, though nothing had been taken. The vicar's cat vanished for several hours, only to be found crouching, terrified, under a hedge. And Mrs. Hargreaves, who prided herself on her garden, noticed footprints where no one should have walked, wet, muddied prints that led toward her greenhouse but vanished mysteriously before reaching it. By afternoon, Miss Marple had made her rounds under the guise of errands. She visited the grocer, complimented Mrs. Hargreaves on her dahlias, and even stopped to chat with the postman. With each interaction, she asked subtle, seemingly innocuous questions. "Did you see anyone unusual passing by this morning? Or were the children in the square today behaving as usual?" Her gentle inquiries were designed to sound casual, yet beneath them, she sifted through inconsistencies, half-truths, and nervous tics. It was when she returned home that the first truly troubling sign emerged. A letter lay in her mailbox without a stamp and unsigned. The envelope was thick, creamy, and bore no return address. Miss Marple's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of intrigue. She opened it carefully, revealing a single sheet of paper typed in stark black ink. "You notice too much. Do not interfere. Some things are best left hidden. No signature, no explanation. Just those words." Miss Marple studied the note, her mind racing. The tone was deliberate, almost mocking, but it confirmed what she had long suspected. Something dangerous had entered her quiet village, and while the villagers remained blissfully ignorant, she could feel the subtle pull of a thread that, if tugged, would unravel a mystery far deadlier than anyone could imagine. By evening, whispers began to circulate. The stranger had been seen entering the village inn. Some villagers claimed to have heard raised voices, others shadows moving behind curtained windows. St. Mary Mead, accustomed to predictability, began to feel unsettled. Miss Marple, however, remained calm. Calmness, she knew, was a weapon. While the villagers panicked, she would observe, listen, and deduce. She noted the stranger's entrance into the inn, the way he avoided eye contact, and the subtle, almost imperceptible way the innkeeper stiffened when he spoke. Everything was a clue, and Miss Marple's mind catalogued it all. That night, as the village settled under the silver glow of the moon, Miss Marple sat by her fireplace, reviewing every detail of the day. Her cat, Paws, curled against her lap, oblivious to the tension in the room. She spread out a small notebook on the table and jotted down observations, connecting them in a web only she could see. Stranger in dark coat observing bank and square. Broken window latch at grocer's shop. Disappearing cat. Muddy footprints near greenhouse. Threatening anonymous letter. Each threat alone might mean little, but together they hinted at a pattern, a hidden danger waiting to strike. Miss Marple leaned back, sipping her tea, allowing herself a rare smile. "Ah, my dear village," she whispered, "you are about to learn that even the quietest corners can hide the deadliest mysteries, and I shall uncover every one of them." Outside, the wind howled through the hedgerows, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and damp earth. Somewhere in the village a shadow moved, silent, deliberate, and watching. Miss Marple felt it as surely as she felt the night pressing against the windows. She would wait, observe, and strike at the truth with the precision of a surgeon. For in St. Mary Mead, appearances were deceiving, and Miss Marple had never been more certain of anything. A deadly mystery had arrived in her village, and it would take every ounce of her cunning to prevent it from claiming more lives. As the clock chimed midnight, she closed her notebook and blew out the candle. Darkness enveloped the room, but her mind burned with the sharp clarity of intuition. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring the first true test, and Miss Marple was ready. The morning after the stranger's arrival, St. Mary Mead seemed calm on the surface. The sun peeked through thin clouds, casting a gentle glow over the village's cobblestone streets. But Miss Marple, with her sharp eyes and ever-curious mind, could sense the unease lingering beneath the ordinary. Every familiar face seemed just a fraction too hurried, every conversation too measured. Something had shifted overnight, and it was only a matter of time before that subtle shift revealed its true danger. Miss Marple began her day as usual, walking along the village square, greeting shopkeepers and pausing to observe small details others overlooked. Her keen eyes fell upon Mrs. Fletcher's cottage at the edge of the village, a neat, ivy-draped house with windows framed in lace curtains. Mrs. Fletcher, a widow in her late 60s, was known for her gardening prowess and her lively gossip. Today, however, her front door was ajar. That alone caught Miss Marple's attention. Approaching cautiously, she knocked softly. "Mrs. Fletcher?" "It's Jane Marple." No response. The door creaked slightly in the morning breeze. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. A neighborly knock would usually elicit a cheerful greeting. Hesitation and silence were unusual for this otherwise meticulous woman. She pushed the door gently. "Mrs. Fletcher?" Inside, the house was unnervingly quiet. Teacups remained on the counter, half-filled. A shawl lay draped across the armchair as though its owner had intended to return at any moment. But there were no signs of Mrs. Fletcher herself. Miss Marple's mind began cataloguing possibilities. A sudden illness, a trip to the market, or, more concerning, a voluntary disappearance. Yet something in the room, a subtle detail Miss Marple could not ignore, told a different story. A chair had been moved, slightly askew as though someone had struggled with it. On the kitchen floor were faint smudges of mud, similar to the prints she had noticed the day before near Mrs. Hargreaves' greenhouse. She called the police, but knew better than to rely solely on their judgment. They would see a missing elderly woman and assume she had wandered off. Miss Marple, however, understood human nature too well to accept appearances at face value. Someone, or something, had intervened in Mrs. Fletcher's routine. By mid-morning, whispers began to ripple through the village. "Have you heard?" one villager said to another outside the grocer's shop. "Mrs. Fletcher hasn't been seen since dawn. It's as if she vanished into thin air." Miss Marple approached cautiously, her sharp eyes noting the reactions. Some villagers looked genuinely worried, while others displayed a flicker of fear or even relief. Curious emotions to accompany such a disappearance. The smallest details often revealed the largest truths, she reminded herself. She retraced Mrs. Fletcher's last known movements, speaking to neighbors who might have seen her. The postman mentioned delivering a letter early in the morning, but claimed not to have seen her afterward. The baker's apprentice noticed a strange figure lingering near the corner of the lane, and a young child insisted she had seen Mrs. Fletcher speaking with a man in a dark coat the previous evening. The same figure Miss Marple had noted near the bank. Piecing together these fragments, Miss Marple felt a chill. It seemed increasingly likely that the stranger's arrival and Mrs. Fletcher's disappearance were connected. But how and why? She returned to the Fletcher cottage, examining the interior more closely. Her eyes caught something unusual. The lace curtains near the back window had been slightly displaced, as if someone had leaned against them from outside. More importantly, a faint scrap of paper lay on the windowsill, partially hidden beneath a flower pot. She retrieved it carefully. It read, in neat handwriting, "You should have stayed away. Some truths are dangerous," another warning. This time, however, it was personal. Whoever was behind Mrs. Fletcher's disappearance knew Miss Marple was watching and attempting to intervene. As she contemplated this, the postman arrived with a small parcel addressed to Miss Marple. Inside was a photograph of Mrs. Fletcher, standing in the village square, but someone had crossed out her face in thick black ink. A message scrawled on the back read, "Stop looking or you'll be next." Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. Threats alone rarely stopped her. If anything, they fueled her determination. Whoever believed fear could deter her had underestimated the depth of her intuition and her ability to see what others could not. That evening, the village held a gathering at the inn. Villagers speculated about Mrs. Fletcher's disappearance, and anxiety simmered beneath polite conversation. A few whispered that she had perhaps left the village voluntarily, but Miss Marple knew better. Voluntary departures rarely left behind a teacup half full, muddy footprints, and cryptic warnings. The inn's atmosphere grew tense when the stranger appeared. He entered quietly, his coat buttoned tight, and surveyed the room with the same predatory interest she had observed before. Villagers stiffened, and a few discreetly moved closer to one another. Miss Marple noted his every gesture, the tilt of his head, the quick glance toward the empty chair where Mrs. Fletcher might have sat, the subtle twitch of a hand beneath his coat. He carried a calmness that was almost menacing, a quiet assertion that he was in control. Miss Marple, sipping her tea at a corner table, allowed herself a small smile. Let him think he was clever. Every detail mattered. Every motion, every shadow, every whispered word could be a clue. She had spent decades observing human nature, and this stranger, for all his confidence, would slip somewhere. Everyone did eventually. Nightfall brought a chilling wind that rattled the inn's windows. Miss Marple returned home, locking her door but leaving her window slightly ajar to hear the sounds outside. She reflected on the day's events, piecing together the puzzle. It was clear to her that Mrs. Fletcher had been taken, not for ransom, not for robbery, but because of some secret that someone wanted to protect or destroy. And that secret, Miss Marple knew, was now tangled with the stranger in the dark coat. The following morning, the village awoke to another shock. A second note had been slipped under the inn's door, this time addressed to the village at large. "Interfering will cost lives. St. Mary Mead hides more than it knows. Some doors should remain closed." Fear gripped the hearts of the villagers, but Miss Marple remained composed. She catalogued the evidence she had. Mrs. Fletcher's mysterious disappearance, the stranger's behavior and presence in multiple locations, threatening notes aimed both at her and the village, muddy footprints inside the Fletcher cottage and outside in the village lanes. Her mind worked swiftly, forming patterns where others saw chaos. The stranger was methodical, intelligent and dangerous, but not infallible. Miss Marple knew that understanding motive and psychology would reveal weaknesses he had left exposed. Late that afternoon, she returned to the Fletcher cottage once more. The back window, slightly ajar the day before, now bore faint scratches that could only have been made from the inside. She knelt to examine them closely, noting the direction of the marks and the height at which they appeared. They suggested that Mrs. Fletcher had resisted and that the abduction was sudden and forceful. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was the vicar, pale and anxious. "Miss Marple, I don't know what to do. The whole village is frightened. People are talking about moving away. What if this person comes for someone else?" She shook her head. "Fear is natural, Reverend, but it is also a veil. Look beneath it and you will see more than shadows. The truth is there. It simply requires patience and observation." Reassured but uneasy, the vicar left. Miss Marple remained, sketching a rough diagram of the village, marking the locations of footprints, sightings, and points of interest. Patterns began to emerge. The stranger had visited 3 locations: the bank, the square, and now, indirectly, the Fletcher cottage. Each point suggested surveillance and careful planning, not random wandering. As twilight descended, she realized that tonight would likely reveal something significant. She prepared a small kit, a flashlight, notebook, and her trusty spectacles, and slipped quietly into the garden. Shadows stretched long across the village lanes, and the cool air carried a sense of anticipation. Hours passed, but Miss Marple remained vigilant, and then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. A shadow slipping silently along the lane, moving toward the inn. She followed at a distance, careful to remain unseen. The stranger paused briefly outside the inn, producing another note and tucking it under the door. Miss Marple crept closer, her heart steady, and retrieved it after he departed. The note was blunt. "Tonight the first truth will be revealed. Watch closely if you dare." A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition. The game had begun in earnest. Mrs. Fletcher's disappearance was only the beginning, and St. Mary Mead was about to witness mysteries that no one could have anticipated. Miss Marple returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. She poured herself a cup of tea, set her notebook open, and prepared for the night's vigil. Somewhere in the village the truth was hiding, and she would uncover it, one shadow at a time. For Miss Marple, the disappearance of Mrs. Fletcher was not just a puzzle, it was a warning, and she would heed it, uncovering the deadly threads that wove through her village with precision, insight, and unyielding determination. The following morning, St. Mary Mead seemed deceptively calm. The mist hung low over the village, curling around rooftops and winding through the lanes like a slow-moving ghost. Birds chirped cautiously, as if aware of the village's new, unsettling rhythm. For the villagers, the disappearance of Mrs. Fletcher was still a topic of hushed conversation. For Miss Marple, it was a challenge, a web of secrets waiting to be unraveled, each thread more tangled than the last. She began her day at the village square, walking slowly among the familiar shops. Her sharp eyes observed the villagers as she greeted them warmly. The baker, the grocer, even the postman, all wore faces that hinted at something beneath the surface. Anxiety was plain in some, guilt in others. Miss Marple noted each subtle twitch of the hand, each averted gaze, each unnatural smile. Her first stop was the inn, where the stranger had been seen the previous evening. The innkeeper, a stout man with a nervous manner, greeted her politely, but with evident tension. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said, wringing his hands. "I don't know what's come over this village. The children are scared. The adults, I don't even know how to describe it." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Fear can cloud judgment, Mr. Daniels, but it also illuminates truths that would otherwise remain hidden." The innkeeper frowned, clearly puzzled by the remark. Miss Marple took it as a positive sign. He was attentive, observant, and slightly anxious, a perfect source of information if approached carefully. She asked him about the night the stranger had appeared. Did anyone enter or leave the inn after he arrived? She inquired, her voice calm, almost casual. "Just a few villagers," he replied, hesitant. "But I didn't see much. It was late, and no one really mentioned anything until today. People are frightened," Miss Marple nodded. Fear often silenced confession, but sometimes it revealed guilt. She made a mental note to follow up with each of the villagers she had seen that evening. By mid-morning she visited the grocer, Mr. Thompson. The broken window latch from the previous day still puzzled him. "I can't imagine why anyone would target my store," he said. "Nothing valuable, really. Perhaps just mischief? Or misdirection," Miss Marple suggested softly, her sharp eyes catching a tremor in his fingers. "Sometimes the simplest distractions hide the more dangerous intentions." Mr. Thompson looked uncomfortable, but said nothing more. Miss Marple filed the observation away. As she moved through the village, a subtle tension grew in the air. Villagers spoke in whispers, glancing nervously over their shoulders. Children played quietly, their laughter muted by the unease that gripped the community. And everywhere, Miss Marple noticed the same shadowy figure of the stranger, moving just out of sight. Always observing, always waiting. By afternoon, she had compiled a list of potential witnesses, suspects, and inconsistencies. Something did not add up. Certain villagers seemed too eager to appear unconcerned, others too panicked, and one pattern struck her more sharply than the rest. The repeated mention of secrets, whispered behind closed doors, as though the village itself was hiding something far darker than Mrs. Fletcher's disappearance. Miss Marple decided it was time for her own subtle interrogation. She would visit each neighbor under the guise of a casual tea or a friendly chat, but in truth, she was probing, listening for inconsistencies, noting reactions, and observing every tiny gesture. Her first stop was the home of Mrs. Hargreaves, whose greenhouse had been the scene of strange footprints the day before. Mrs. Hargreaves greeted her warmly, though her eyes darted nervously toward the window. "I've been worried about Mrs. Fletcher," Miss Marple began, pouring tea. "Do you remember anything unusual yesterday?" Mrs. Hargreaves hesitated. "Well, I did hear a voice in the garden, but I thought it was just the wind. Or perhaps a cat." Miss Marple sipped her tea slowly, letting the silence stretch. "A man's voice, perhaps?" The older woman's face went pale. I don't know. It's hard to say." Miss Marple made a subtle note. Hesitation often meant concealment, and concealment often hid truth. Next, she visited the home of young Mr. and Mrs. Collings, recently married, known for their cheerful demeanor. Yet as she arrived, she noticed a locked gate and the faint smell of smoke, unusual for a morning in October. Inside, they spoke cautiously, but their words were riddled with contradictions. Mr. Collings claimed he had been gardening all morning, yet the soil in the garden was dry, not disturbed. Mrs. Collings insisted she had not seen anyone enter the street, yet a faint footprint on the porch suggested otherwise. Miss Marple's mind raced. Something about their story didn't match reality. Either they were hiding something, or they were terrified of being involved in something they could not explain. The day darkened quickly as clouds rolled over the village. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the square, noticing a group of villagers gathered near the fountain. Their conversation was muted but tense. "It's the stranger," one whispered. "I've seen him speaking to the vicar late last night. He's up to something, I'm certain of it." Miss Marple's ears pricked. The stranger had made his presence known more than she had initially realized. His movements were calculated, almost theatrical, designed to instill fear and manipulate attention. As dusk fell, the atmosphere grew heavy. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her mind alive with connections and possibilities. Yet she could not ignore an uneasy feeling, a warning, almost instinctual, that tonight might bring more than whispers. And she was right. Around 11 o'clock, a scream tore through the village. The sound came from the Collings home. Miss Marple's heart raced, but she was quick. She grabbed her coat, her flashlight, and her notebook, and ran through the misty streets toward the source. Arriving at the Collings gate, she saw the front door ajar. Inside, chaos reigned, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and faint bloody smears along the carpet. But the Collings were nowhere to be seen. Her sharp eyes scanned the room and noted the evidence. A faint trail of blood leading toward the back exit. A broken vase near the hall, and an ominous scrap of paper clutched in the corner. She retrieved the note, her hands steady despite the shock. "Do not interfere, Miss Marple. Secrets have consequences." A chill ran down her spine. The stranger's warning was clear, and it had escalated. This was no longer just about Mrs. Fletcher's disappearance. Now someone else had vanished, and violence had left its mark. Miss Marple quickly examined the trail of evidence, realizing it led toward the edge of the village, near the old abandoned mill. She moved with caution, keeping to the shadows, aware that the stranger, or someone allied with him, might be watching. The mill loomed ahead, silent and foreboding. Windows broken, doors creaking in the wind, it seemed an unlikely place for anyone to hide. But Miss Marple had learned that appearances were deceiving. She stepped inside, flashlight sweeping across the dusty interior. Suddenly, a movement. She froze. In the corner of the room, partially hidden beneath a tattered tarpaulin, she saw them. Mr. and Mrs. Collings, bound and unconscious. Her heart raced. Someone had taken them here deliberately, leaving signs meant to terrify and mislead. As she worked quickly to free them, a shadow shifted near the doorway. Miss Marple turned slowly, her mind sharp. The stranger emerged, his coat buttoned, face expressionless, eyes cold and calculating. "You're persistent, Miss Marple," he said quietly, almost admiringly. "But some truths are not meant for women like you." Miss Marple's gaze was steady, her voice calm. "Truths are for anyone who seeks them, and I always seek them." The stranger's lips curled into a faint smile, but he did not approach further. Instead, he retreated into the shadows, disappearing as silently as he had arrived. Miss Marple turned back to the Collings, ensuring they were unharmed aside from shock and bruises. As she escorted them safely back toward the village, her mind whirled. The danger had escalated dramatically. The stranger was methodical, calculating and clearly enjoying the fear he inspired. But he had made a crucial mistake, revealing his direct involvement. Miss Marple now had a lead, and she would pursue it relentlessly. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fireplace, notebook open, tea steaming beside her. The events of the evening were meticulously recorded, evidence catalogued, and patterns emerging with startling clarity. The stranger's movements, the choice of victims, the cryptic notes, they all pointed toward a mind that thrived on manipulation and terror. Miss Marple leaned back, a small, resolute smile on her face. The village of St. Mary Mead had been shaken, its secrets exposed to shadow, but she was ready. The whispered lies had begun, but she would uncover every truth, no matter how deadly. Tonight had been shocking. Tomorrow the pursuit would deepen, and Miss Marple, calm, clever, and unyielding, would be at the center of uncovering the deadly web that threatened to engulf her quiet village. The village of St. Mary Mead was trembling beneath a veil of fear. After the calling's terrifying ordeal, whispers turned into panic. Shopkeepers locked their doors earlier than usual, children were kept under strict supervision, and even the usually gossipy villagers spoke in hushed tones. Shadows seemed to linger longer than before, and every unexpected sound, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of leaves, sent a shiver through the community. Miss Marple, however, remained unshaken. She understood that fear was a tool, and when wielded cleverly it could reveal truths that were otherwise hidden. Tonight's events had confirmed what she suspected. The stranger was no ordinary intruder. He was deliberate, intelligent, and unrelenting. More importantly, he had a plan, and Miss Marple intended to uncover it. Morning light seeped through her window, soft and gray. The air carried the scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, and something subtler, smoke, faint but distinct. It reminded her of burning matches or perhaps a candle extinguished hastily. She dressed quickly, gathering her notebook, spectacles, and flashlight. Her first destination was the inn, a place where the stranger had been seen more than once and where villagers had begun to confide in her, despite their fear. The inn was quieter than usual, the hearth cold. Mr. Daniels, the innkeeper, stood behind the counter, wringing his hands. "Miss Marple, I don't know what to do. People are frightened. Some say the stranger is watching every corner of the village. I've even seen him speaking to some visitors." Quietly, in shadows, Miss Marple nodded. "Quietly observing, yes, but shadows often conceal more than they reveal. Our task is to find the places he fears to tread, the corners he ignores." She inquired if anyone had noticed the stranger leave the village during the night. Mr. Daniels shook his head. "I've seen him come and go at odd hours, always alone, always careful." That afternoon, Miss Marple decided to investigate the outskirts of St. Mary Mead, where the village road curved around the abandoned mill and vanished into woodland. There, the night before, she had spotted faint tracks leading toward the Collings abduction site. Now, under the midday sun, the evidence was more discernible. Footprints were deep, calculated, as if someone knew they might be followed but expected no one to notice. Miss Marple knelt, inspecting the prints. Small, careful, and purposeful. Yet she detected a detail the stranger had missed. A faint scuff along the right heel of the left boot. Whoever wore these shoes had a slight limp, a fact she filed away carefully. Every clue, no matter how minor, brought her closer to understanding him. As she traced the footprints further, she discovered something unexpected. A tiny silver charm, half buried in the mud. It was shaped like a key, ornate and unusual. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. Whoever dropped this charm had not done so by accident. It was a message, a calling card, or a symbol. And it hinted at a past, a secret, a motive. Returning to the village, Miss Marple examined the small silver key in her study, consulting mental files she had stored from years of observation. A key, she thought, often symbolized access to something locked, both literally and metaphorically. And in a village as quaint as St. Mary Mead, few places would be locked or hidden, except old cottages, attics, and barns abandoned for decades. Perhaps the stranger was after one such location. The following evening, Miss Marple arranged a casual tea gathering, inviting a few villagers under the pretense of friendly conversation. She sought not comfort, but information, observing every glance, every hesitation, every twitch. Her guests included Mr. Thompson the grocer, Mrs. Hargreaves, and the village vicar. Midway through the gathering, the conversation drifted toward Mrs. Fletcher and the Callings. Subtly, Miss Marple watched reactions. The grocer's hands trembled slightly. Mrs. Hargreaves' eyes darted to the window, and the vicar's voice grew careful, measured. Each reaction was a piece of the puzzle. Then, a subtle noise outside, a faint scuffing on the cobblestones, drew Miss Marple's attention. She excused herself, stepping to the window. A shadow moved quickly just beyond the lantern-lit street, vanishing behind the corner of the inn. The stranger had returned, bold enough to leave a trace, yet cautious enough to avoid direct confrontation. Miss Marple knew he wanted something that lay hidden in St. Mary Mead. But what? Later that night, she followed the sound to the back of the inn, crouching low, as the stranger moved along the side alley. He carried something, a small dark package carefully wrapped. He paused at a particular door, examining the lock, and then produced a key. Miss Marple's heart skipped. It was the same shape as the silver charm she had found in the mud earlier that day. The stranger unlocked the door with ease and slipped inside. Miss Marple waited, crouched in shadow, listening. Inside the building, faint voices emerged, one low, commanding, the other fearful, trembling. Miss Marple's sharp ears caught fragments. Must keep it hidden. Never let them know.
I didn't want to.
But you made me. A struggle. Then silence. Miss Marple waited another moment and then carefully entered the building once the stranger had exited. The interior was dimly lit, dusty, abandoned. On the floor lay papers, photographs, and what looked like a small ledger. She picked up a photo, her eyes widening in recognition. It was Mrs. Fletcher, but not as she knew her. Dressed formally, standing with a man whose face was partially obscured. A date was scrawled on the back, 15 years ago. The pieces began to fall together. The stranger's vendetta, or mission, was rooted in the past. Something Mrs. Fletcher had known, something she had perhaps participated in, had created the chain of events now threatening the village. The silver charm, the package, the threats, all connected to a secret long buried. Suddenly, a noise behind her made her spin. The stranger stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and dangerous. "I warned you before." "And yet here I am," Miss Marple replied calmly, studying him. "You want something from this village. But what you do not understand is that secrets have a way of being revealed, especially when someone notices the smallest details." He stepped closer, and Miss Marple noted the limp she had deduced from the footprints, subtle but unmistakable. Every movement he made was calculated, but he had underestimated her observation skills. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said, almost pleading. "But if they interfere—" "If she interferes?" His eyes flicked toward the photograph of Mrs. Fletcher. "Oh, then there will be consequences." "You mean the village?" she said softly. "You mean fear, chaos, and lies. But one thing you do not know is this. I notice, I understand, and I act." The stranger hesitated, his composure faltering just for a moment. A crack Miss Marple never missed. Using that fraction of hesitation, she subtly shifted her stance, ready to block any sudden move. "You will leave, and no one will be harmed," she said firmly. "Or I will ensure that the truth comes out, one way or another." He studied her, calculating, then, almost in defeat, retreated. As he vanished into the night, Miss Marple breathed a silent sigh. She had uncovered the beginnings of his motive, the connections to Mrs. Fletcher, and a dangerous secret buried in the past. The village, she realized, was now a stage for more than fear. It was a battlefield for truths hidden and lies whispered, for lives manipulated by shadows and secrets. And Miss Marple was at its center, determined to unravel every thread, no matter how deadly the consequences. By dawn, she had mapped out a plan. The stranger's pattern was emerging. Observe, intimidate, abduct if necessary, and always leave a trail that both frightened and misled. But his human weaknesses, his reliance on intimidation, his need to control, his subtle arrogance, provided Miss Marple the leverage she needed. She also realized the chilling truth. The stranger was not acting randomly. He had chosen St. Mary Mead deliberately. Something, or someone, in the village held a secret worth terrorizing the entire community, and Mrs. Fletcher, whether willing or unwilling, was at the heart of it. Miss Marple sat by her fire, notebook open, candle flickering, the silver key, the photographs, the notes, all pieces of a puzzle that, when completed, would reveal the stranger's true intentions. She knew the next move would be critical, One misstep and lives could be lost. One correct insight, and the entire plan could unravel. Her cat, Paws, curled beside her, unaware of the danger but perfectly in tune with her focus. Outside, the first rays of sun touched the village lanes, painting St. Mary Mead in golden shadow. For now, the village slept, but the game had only begun. Miss Marple's mind worked tirelessly, reconstructing timelines, motives, and potential outcomes. She understood, more clearly than ever, that uncovering the stranger's secret would require courage, intelligence, and patience beyond ordinary measure, and Miss Marple was ready. The shadows over St. Mary Mead had grown darker, and the stranger's secret was only beginning to emerge, but the detective in the quiet village had seen patterns invisible to others, and she would not rest until every hidden truth was brought into the light, no matter how shocking, no matter how deadly. St. Mary Mead had changed. What had once been a peaceful, predictable village now carried an undercurrent of tension so thick it could almost be cut with a knife. Windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and whispers of fear carried from one cobblestone street to another. The recent disappearances, the stranger's presence, and cryptic threats had transformed the village into a labyrinth of suspicion. Miss Marple walked through the village square, her eyes scanning every detail: footprints in mud along narrow alleys, faint scratches on doorframes, the tilt of a window shutter that hinted at a hurried departure or entry. Each subtle clue added another piece to a growing, deadly puzzle, a puzzle she was determined to solve. Her first stop was the Fletcher cottage. Though empty, the house still radiated unease. On the kitchen table lay a faintly burned scrap of paper, partially destroyed as if someone had tried to erase its contents. Miss Marple carefully gathered it. Among the charred remnants, she discerned faint letters forming a name: Harrison. That single clue hinted at a hidden connection, perhaps a past grievance or long-standing vendetta. Next, she visited the Collings' home. The young couple was recovering, but their fear was palpable. Miss Marple spoke gently, probing for inconsistencies without alarming them further. "Did anything unusual happen before your abduction?" she asked. Mr. Collings swallowed hard. There was a letter delivered the day before, unsigned, but it warned us not to interfere with certain matters. I thought it was a joke at first. Now, his voice trembled. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Patterns were emerging. Threatening notes, silent observation, abductions. Each act was methodical, calculated to create maximum fear and confusion. Someone in St. Mary Mead, or someone connected to it, had orchestrated all of this. By mid-afternoon, Miss Marple had compiled a detailed map of the village. She marked locations of sightings, footprints, and suspicious activity. A pattern emerged. The stranger's movements formed a deliberate triangle: the inn, the Fletcher cottage, and the abandoned mill. But there were anomalies, locations he had avoided entirely. These omissions were as revealing as his choices, suggesting places of safety or hidden knowledge. Miss Marple's attention turned to the village's outskirts, a cluster of old cottages abandoned decades ago. One in particular, the old Harrington house, had always been rumored to contain secrets. Its windows were boarded, its garden overgrown. Perhaps the key, the literal and figurative key, was hidden there. That night, the village was quiet. Almost too quiet. Miss Marple set out under the cover of darkness, flashlight in hand, her mind alive with possibilities. She approached the Harrington house cautiously. The gate creaked under her touch, and a chill ran down her spine. Something about the place was wrong, though she could not yet name it. Inside, dust coated every surface. She moved silently, her eyes scanning for evidence. Then, beneath a loose floorboard, she discovered a small tin box. Opening it, she found letters, photographs, and documents, records of past disputes, secret dealings, and the long-forgotten Harrison family. The mystery now deepened. Someone had returned to exact revenge, or perhaps to recover something lost decades ago. Suddenly, a noise upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate, slow, measured. Someone was in the house. Miss Marple hid in the shadows, heart steady, ears straining. A figure descended the staircase. The stranger, cloak buttoned, moving with the same quiet precision that had terrified the village for weeks. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, though his tone held more curiosity than anger. "I thought I left nothing behind that could lead you here." "And yet," Miss Marple replied calmly, stepping from the shadows, "here I am." You have underestimated me." The stranger paused, evaluating her. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but not unkind, an odd mixture of menace and admiration. "You are persistent, Miss Marple." "Perhaps too persistent, but the game is not yet lost. One more misstep, and you will regret it." "I have observed," she said, "every movement, every pattern, every letter. Your puzzle is no longer complete to you alone. Every thread is visible to me now, and every threat has consequences." He studied her silently for a long moment, then moved away, disappearing into the night with the grace of a shadow. Miss Marple breathed quietly, aware that the confrontation, while brief, had revealed a critical truth. The stranger was meticulous, but human. He had weaknesses, patterns, and fears that could be exploited. Returning home, she spread out the evidence collected over the past week. The silver key, the photographs of Mrs. Fletcher and Harrison, the threatening letters, and the observations from the village, each piece connected to another, forming a complex web of motives, lies, and hidden grudges. Then a chilling thought struck her. What if Mrs. Fletcher knew more than she had revealed in the past? What if her disappearance was not just a random act of terror, but a targeted move to silence her? Miss Marple's mind raced. She recalled the photographs showing Mrs. Fletcher with a man identified only as Harrison, someone from a previous generation, whose name had surfaced repeatedly in the letters. She realized the stakes were higher than she had imagined. This was no simple intimidation. Someone was orchestrating events to settle old scores, and the village was a stage for their revenge. But who and why now? Midnight brought another note, slipped under her door. "The past will be revealed, and the present will bleed. Watch closely, or you will see it too late." Miss Marple examined it carefully. The handwriting matched the previous notes, but was sharper, more deliberate. Someone was escalating, testing her patience and courage. By dawn she had developed a plan. The stranger's pattern revealed both his strengths and vulnerabilities. Each location he visited, each note he left, each victim he threatened was a piece of the puzzle. Miss Marple realized that to prevent further harm, she would need to anticipate his moves, predict his intentions, and confront him before he could act again. She began visiting the villagers, subtly probing for connections to the Harrison family and old grudges. Conversations revealed new, unexpected truths, long-forgotten disputes over property, secret alliances, and unspoken resentments that spanned generations. The puzzle was deepening indeed, and each revelation added urgency to her task. By late afternoon, a pattern became clear. The stranger's ultimate target was not random. He was searching for something, a secret hidden in plain sight within St. Mary Mead, connected to the Harrison family and perhaps known to Mrs. Fletcher. Whoever he believed possessed this knowledge would be at risk, and the clock was ticking. As night fell, Miss Marple stationed herself at the village edge near the abandoned mill. She had anticipated that the stranger would return, either to check his progress or to retrieve an item left behind. Hours passed, the darkness thick and suffocating, until finally a figure appeared, moving with that familiar, deliberate precision. Miss Marple observed, noting every detail, the limp, the careful steps, the cautious glances over the shoulder. Then he paused, looking around as if sensing her presence. Miss Marple stayed perfectly still, her patience a weapon sharper than any blade. Suddenly, he moved toward a hidden trapdoor near the mill. She realized he had discovered something, or believed he had. With a swift, silent approach, she followed at a safe distance, watching as he lifted the cover and descended into the darkness below. Miss Marple hesitated only for a moment before following. The underground passage was narrow, damp, and cold, filled with the musty scent of decay. Shadows danced along the walls, distorted by her flashlight. At the far end, she glimpsed a figure hunched over, someone bound, struggling quietly. It was Mrs. Fletcher. She had been held here, hidden away, her knowledge and presence critical to the stranger's plan. Miss Marple moved closer, careful not to alert the stranger. The sight of Mrs. Fletcher, frightened but unharmed, fueled her determination. She would not allow this villain to succeed. Then, from above, the stranger's voice echoed, "You are clever, Miss Marple, but cleverness alone will not save her, or anyone else. The game is far from over." A chill ran down Miss Marple's spine. The puzzle had deepened, the stakes had risen, and the shadows over St. Mary Mead had grown darker. But she had also discovered critical truths. The location of the captives, the patterns of the stranger, and the key connections to the Harrison family. As she guided Mrs. Fletcher to safety through the labyrinthine passages, Miss Marple understood one vital fact. The stranger's plan was intricate, but human nature was predictable, and she had spent decades observing it. Every lie, every fear, every whispered secret could be unraveled with patience and intelligence. By the time dawn broke over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had returned Mrs. Fletcher safely to her cottage. The village remained unaware of the near tragedy that had unfolded beneath their feet, but the detective herself knew. The stranger had revealed only a fraction of his secret. The puzzle was far from solved, the danger far from over. Miss Marple sat by her window, notebook open, candle flickering beside her. She reviewed every detail, every clue, every subtle gesture she had observed over the past days. The puzzle had deepened indeed, and now, more than ever, the solution depended on foresight, courage, and the quiet, unyielding power of observation, and Miss Marple, calm, patient, and resolute, would see it through to the end, no matter how shocking the revelations, no matter how deadly the consequences. The village of St. Mary Mead was no longer the idyllic haven it had once been. Its quaint cottages and cobblestone streets hid fear and suspicion, tension crackling in the very air. After the Collings abduction and the discovery of Mrs. Fletcher in the mill, villagers spoke in hushed tones, wary of each shadow, each unfamiliar face, each sound in the dark. Miss Marple, however, remained calm, her mind a precise instrument, observing every detail, cataloguing every clue. Morning dawned pale and gray, the sunlight struggling through thick clouds. Miss Marple set out to visit the Fletcher cottage, finding Mrs. Fletcher visibly shaken but recovering. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come," Miss Marple smiled gently. "Fear makes people careless, Mrs. Fletcher." The stranger underestimated patience and observation, and we must always remember, nothing is as simple as it seems. Mrs. Fletcher nodded, but the worry in her eyes betrayed her. She had glimpsed only fragments of the stranger's plan, yet she instinctively understood that danger still loomed. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village. She needed to act decisively to prevent further harm. The stranger had a pattern, predictable yet cunning. His targets were not random. They were chosen for their connections to the Harrison family, to secrets buried in the past. And he had the advantage of fear. By late morning, Miss Marple visited the inn, observing villagers' interactions. Their whispers were cautious, their movements hesitant. The fear had spread like wildfire, muting even the most talkative villagers. But fear, Miss Marple knew, could also reveal truths hidden beneath politeness. She approached Mr. Thompson, the grocer, carefully watching his reaction. "Have you noticed anything unusual recently?" she asked, voice soft. He glanced around nervously before replying, I saw someone lurking near the mill yesterday. A figure just standing, watching. It was unnerving, to say the least." Miss Marple noted the detail. The stranger was bold, brazen, and confident, but each public appearance was a trace, a vulnerability. Patterns emerged in his boldness, and Miss Marple intended to exploit them. By afternoon, she walked the village streets, observing windows, doors, and shadows. Her sharp eyes detected subtle signs: curtains slightly moved, footprints in the dirt, and faint scuff marks near the mill's side entrance. Each small clue was a whisper of the stranger's presence, a hint of his plans. That evening she gathered Mrs. Fletcher, the Collings, and the vicar for a discreet meeting. The room was dimly lit, filled with tension. Miss Marple laid out her observations. "The stranger is intelligent, calculated, and deliberate," she said. "He thrives on fear, but every move he makes leaves evidence. Our task is to anticipate him, to understand his motives, and to prevent further harm." Mrs. Fletcher shivered. "But what is he after? Why St. Mary Mead?" Miss Marple held up a photograph from the Harrison collection. The Harrison family held secrets, disputes, alliances, and grievances that stretched decades. "The stranger seeks something hidden in our village, something he believes only certain individuals can reveal. He uses fear to manipulate, but fear also makes him predictable." The meeting ended with a plan. Villagers would remain vigilant, report anything unusual immediately, and avoid confrontation. Miss Marple herself would observe, follow, and gather information. Night fell, thick and suffocating, shadows stretching long across the village lanes. Miss Marple stationed herself near the mill, aware that the stranger might return. Hours passed, silence stretching to a tense extreme. Then a faint scuffle in the underbrush. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her steps remained quiet. She approached slowly, flashlight in hand, noting the figure of a man moving with deliberate stealth. The stranger was back. He moved toward the mill, then paused, scanning the surroundings with sharp, calculated eyes. Miss Marple stayed in shadow, observing. His actions were deliberate. He produced a small object from his coat, a package carefully wrapped, and tucked it beneath a loose stone near the mill's side. Then he vanished into darkness, leaving only faint footprints and the lingering scent of smoke. Miss Marple approached cautiously, retrieving the package. Inside was a set of letters, torn and partially burned, written decades ago. They detailed disputes over land, family secrets, and a hidden inheritance. The stranger's plan became clear. He sought to unearth long-buried truths, manipulate fear, and control outcomes to his advantage. As she examined the letters, a sudden movement caught her attention. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. Someone watching her. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, but her mind remained sharp. She caught a glimpse of a figure slipping into the woods, vanishing with uncanny silence. It was not the stranger, at least not fully. Someone else was involved, an accomplice perhaps, feeding information, observing, and manipulating fear. The puzzle had grown deeper, more dangerous, and far more intricate than she had anticipated. By dawn, Miss Marple had retraced the stranger's steps, cataloging every detail. Footprints led to the Collings home, then to the mill, and finally toward the outskirts of the village. Each move was calculated, a breadcrumb trail leading her closer to understanding his ultimate goal. But the most chilling discovery awaited her at the Fletcher cottage. A note, slipped under the door while she had been away, read, "You are close. Too close. The shadows will engulf you if you continue. Stop now." Miss Marple studied it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable. The stranger. His warnings were not empty threats. They were carefully calculated psychological weapons, designed to instill fear, delay action, and manipulate the villagers. But Miss Marple knew better than to be intimidated. Her investigation revealed another disturbing fact. Someone in the village had been communicating with the stranger, feeding him information, either out of fear, loyalty, or greed. Every piece of evidence now suggested that the danger was not just external, it had roots within the community itself. By mid-afternoon, she confronted the vicar privately. "Someone is helping him," she said quietly. "Not openly, but subtly, providing guidance, information, and access. We must uncover who, and quickly." The vicar looked pale. I don't know who it could be, Jane. Everyone seems frightened, afraid to act." "Fear is a tool," Miss Marple replied, "and it blinds us to the truth. But patience, observation, and careful analysis reveal even the darkest secrets." As night fell again, Miss Marple returned to the village square. The wind carried whispers, rustling leaves, and distant sounds of movement. Shadows shifted, and the darkness seemed alive. She stationed herself strategically, anticipating the stranger's return. Hours passed, tension building to a near unbearable level. Then movement, a figure approaching from the woods, cautious but purposeful. The stranger emerged, carrying a new package. He paused, sensing something, then glanced toward the square. Miss Marple stepped from her hiding place, flashlight steady, voice calm but firm. "I see you, and I understand what you are doing." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "You are persistent, too persistent, but I am patient and I have planned for every possibility." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Even the smallest detail can unravel the best-laid plans. Every movement, every choice you make leaves evidence, and I notice it all." For a long moment they faced each other in silence, the village square a stage of tension, fear, and intelligence. Then the stranger moved away, vanishing into the night, leaving only the package behind. Miss Marple retrieved it carefully. Inside were more letters, photographs, and documents connecting the stranger's motives to past village disputes, the Harrison family, and a hidden inheritance that had caused resentment spanning decades. The puzzle deepened, revealing a web of greed, secrecy, and manipulation. By dawn, Miss Marple had reconstructed the sequence of events: the stranger's psychological manipulation, the accomplice in the village, the escalating threats. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan to control the narrative of St. Mary Mead, unearth secrets, and eliminate anyone who opposed him. She realized one truth above all: the stranger's ultimate goal was within reach, and the danger would escalate unless she acted decisively. The village was under siege not just physically, but psychologically, and time was running out. Miss Marple sat in her study, notebook open, candle flickering. The shadows over St. Mary Mead had grown longer, and the stranger's game had become more dangerous, more intricate, and more deadly. But she had patterns, observations, and insight on her side, and she would stop him, no matter the risk, no matter the shocking revelations that awaited, no matter the deadly consequences. The village slept uneasily. Outside shadows moved, secrets whispered in the dark, and danger waited patiently. But Miss Marple, calm, sharp, and resolute, was ready to face it all. The village of St. Mary Mead had not yet recovered from the previous week's terror. Fear lingered like a heavy fog, settling over every street, every lane, every cottage. Windows were shuttered, doors bolted, and even the most confident villagers whispered nervously, glancing over their shoulders. It was in this tense atmosphere that Miss Marple moved silently, observing, cataloging, and anticipating the next move. Morning brought no relief. The Fletchers were still shaken, the Collings recovering, and yet the air of unease remained thick. Every shadow seemed menacing, every unfamiliar noise a potential threat. Miss Marple began her day with a meticulous review of the evidence she had gathered: the letters, photographs, silver key, footprints, and threatening notes. Each piece hinted at the stranger's next move, each subtle pattern pointing to potential danger. By late morning, she decided to visit the village inn, where whispers of suspicious activity had reached her ears. Mr. Daniels, the innkeeper, greeted her nervously. "Miss Marple, I saw someone last night moving near the edge of the woods. A figure, quiet, deliberate, watching." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully.
"A careful observer, Mr. Daniels. Often the most cautious leave traces, however small."
"And those traces can reveal everything." Her sharp eyes scanned the village square, noting subtle disturbances: footprints leading away from alleyways, a slightly tilted fence post, and disturbed soil near the abandoned mill. Each sign was a breadcrumb, a hint of movement, a silent message left by the stranger. By afternoon, Miss Marple visited the Harrington house again. The letters and documents she had found previously hinted at a hidden inheritance, family secrets, and long-standing grievances. She suspected the stranger sought to exploit these old disputes, manipulate fear, and control outcomes. But what worried her most was the realization that someone else in the village was feeding him information. Evening fell, thick and heavy, shadows stretching long across the streets. Miss Marple stationed herself near the mill, aware that the stranger might strike again. Hours passed in tense silence, until a faint movement in the underbrush caught her attention. It was the stranger. He moved with deliberate stealth, carrying a small package, eyes scanning the surroundings with precision. Miss Marple observed silently, heart steady, mind alert. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, a pattern she had seen before. Suddenly a shout broke the stillness. From the opposite side of the mill, a villager appeared, running, panic in every motion. The stranger reacted instantly, a swift, practiced movement intercepting the villager before they could raise an alarm. A struggle ensued, brief but intense. Miss Marple's sharp eyes noted every detail: the stranger's limp, the precise movements, the way he manipulated fear and physicality simultaneously. When the struggle ended, the villager lay unconscious, hidden behind the mill. The stranger, unperturbed, disappeared into darkness, leaving only faint footprints and the package behind. Miss Marple approached cautiously, examining the package. Inside were more letters, photographs, and a small ledger detailing disputes, secrets, and transactions spanning decades. The puzzle deepened. The stranger's knowledge of the village was comprehensive, terrifying in its scope, and precise in its execution. Miss Marple realized that the first strike had occurred. This was no longer merely about fear or intimidation. It was an active, calculated escalation. The stranger's actions were deliberate, designed to destabilize, manipulate, and control. By midnight, she had traced the footprints back to a hidden path leading into the woods. Shadows shifted, and the faint sounds of movement suggested the stranger had returned. Miss Marple followed carefully, noting every subtle disturbance: snapped twigs, displaced leaves, faint impressions in mud. Deeper into the woods, she found a small, concealed clearing. There, partially hidden beneath a tarp, were the kidnapped letters, photographs, and a faint trace of smoke, evidence that the stranger had been conducting some sort of ritual or investigation. Her eyes scanned the area, and she noticed faint footprints leading toward an old, abandoned shed. Inside the shed, she found another shocking discovery: the Collings' missing cat, Patches, tangled in a net, frightened but unharmed. The message was clear. The stranger was escalating, sending warnings, demonstrating control, and exploiting fear. Each act was deliberate, each move a psychological weapon. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, cataloging every detail. She reviewed the letters, photographs, and footprints, piecing together the stranger's pattern. His strategy was emerging: isolate targets, manipulate fear, remove or hide critical evidence, and maintain psychological control over the village. The next morning, she visited the vicar privately. "Someone is helping him," she said quietly. Not openly, but subtly, providing guidance, information, and access. "We must uncover who, and quickly." The vicar looked pale. I don't know who it could be, Jane. Everyone seems frightened, afraid to act." "Fear is a tool," Miss Marple replied, "and it blinds us to the truth. But patience, observation, and careful analysis reveal even the darkest secrets." Later that evening, the village was quiet. Almost too quiet. Miss Marple stationed herself near the Collings' home, anticipating the stranger's return. Hours passed, tension mounting until finally, movement. A figure approaching from the woods. The stranger emerged, carrying another package. He paused, scanning the surroundings, then glanced toward the square. Miss Marple stepped from her hiding place, flashlight steady, voice calm but firm. "I see you, and I understand what you are doing." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "You are persistent."
Too persistent.
"But I am patient, and I have planned for every possibility." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Even the smallest detail can unravel the best-laid plans. Every movement, every choice you make leaves evidence, and I notice it all." For a long moment they faced each other in silence, the village square a stage of tension, fear, and intelligence. Then the stranger moved away, disappearing into the night, leaving only the package behind. Inside, Miss Marple found more letters, photographs, and documents connecting the stranger's motives to past village disputes, the Harrison family, and a hidden inheritance that had caused resentment spanning decades. The puzzle deepened, revealing a web of greed, secrecy, and manipulation. By dawn, Miss Marple had reconstructed the sequence of events: the stranger's psychological manipulation, the accomplice in the village, the escalating threats. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan to control the narrative of St. Mary Mead, unearth secrets, and eliminate anyone who opposed him. She realized one truth above all: the stranger's ultimate goal was within reach, and the danger would escalate unless she acted decisively. The village was under siege not just physically but psychologically, and time was running out. Miss Marple sat in her study, notebook open, candle flickering. The shadows over St. Mary Mead had grown longer, and the stranger's game had become more dangerous, more intricate, and more deadly. But she had patterns, observations, and insight on her side, and she would stop him, no matter the risk, no matter the shocking revelations that awaited, no matter the deadly consequences. The village slept uneasily. Outside, shadows moved, secrets whispered in the dark, and danger waited patiently. But Miss Marple, calm, sharp, and resolute, was ready to face it all. St. Mary Mead awoke under a veil of unease. The villagers, once comfortable in their routines, now moved cautiously, their eyes darting toward every shadow, every flicker of movement. Even the church bell, which had long rung to signal comfort and order, now carried a weight of anxiety. It was a village transformed, and at its center was a woman whose calm, keen eyes saw everything: Miss Marple. The morning brought no respite. Reports of strange figures, unexplained noises, and missing items filtered in from every corner. Miss Marple reviewed her growing collection of letters, photographs, and notes. Each piece of evidence revealed more than just the stranger's immediate actions. It traced a map of long-buried secrets, hidden motives, and intricate vendettas. She decided her first visit would be to the Fletcher cottage, where Mrs. Fletcher remained frightened, yet determined to assist. The young woman had recovered enough to recount critical details. "There were documents," Mrs. Fletcher whispered, her voice trembling. "Old letters, ledgers, Things I thought were long gone. He was searching for them, but he didn't find everything. Miss Marple nodded. He's thorough, Mrs. Fletcher, meticulous, but thoroughness is also weakness. Each step he takes leaves a trace, and each choice reveals something about him. That is how we will uncover the full picture. They spent the morning reconstructing Mrs. Fletcher's experience, identifying every overlooked detail, the sound of his boots on cobblestone, the pattern of his movements, and a faint, metallic scent that clung to the air, a scent associated with old locks, keys, and metal filings. Miss Marple's mind catalogued every nuance. By afternoon, she visited the Collings home. The young couple remained shaken but cooperative. Miss Marple carefully reviewed the sequence of events surrounding their near abduction. Patterns emerged. The stranger targeted those with knowledge, influence, or access to the Harrison family secrets. And each act of intimidation or abduction was precise, calculated to manipulate fear and control outcomes. With evidence mounting, Miss Marple turned her attention to the village itself. She walked the streets, examining every alley, every shuttered window, every disturbance in the dirt and cobblestones. She noted faint footprints, displaced leaves, and subtle scratches along doors, all signs of the stranger's meticulous attention to detail. By evening, Miss Marple had reconstructed the stranger's likely path and predicted his next move. She prepared accordingly, positioning herself near the abandoned Harrington house, a location implicated in the historical disputes surrounding the Harrison family. Hours passed in tense silence. The wind carried whispers, rustling leaves, and distant sounds of movement. Shadows shifted, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes detected a figure moving cautiously along the perimeter. It was the stranger. He carried a small, wrapped package and paused near a loose stone in the yard. Miss Marple observed silently, cataloging his every action, the deliberate motion, the precise glances, the cautious steps. Suddenly, he lifted the stone and retrieved a hidden item, an old ledger detailing the Harrison family's disputes, inheritance claims, and long-buried secrets. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not out of fear but anticipation. This ledger was the key, the core of his obsession, and the source of the village's recent terror. The stranger paused, as if sensing a presence. Miss Marple remained in shadow, observing. He inspected the ledger, muttering under his breath, his eyes flicking to the woods, the village, and the distant cottages. Then, as if satisfied, he tucked the ledger under his coat and vanished into the darkness. Miss Marple waited until the rustling ceased before following cautiously. The stranger led her to a secluded section of the woods, a narrow path she had noted before but never explored fully. It wound through dense trees, undergrowth thick enough to conceal even the most careful movements. At the end of the path he entered a small, hidden clearing. Miss Marple remained unseen, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. There she witnessed something shocking. The stranger had set up a temporary camp, complete with maps, notes, and carefully arranged photographs. It was a command center of obsession, the epicenter of his intricate plan. She noted every detail, the arrangement of letters, the markings on maps, the connections between photographs and documents. Patterns became clear. The stranger was not merely seeking revenge or settling old scores. He was constructing a narrative, manipulating events to ensure that the village, and specifically those connected to the Harrison family, were controlled entirely by fear and secrecy. Then a sudden sound, a twig snapping, made her spin. Another figure emerged, the stranger's accomplice. Miss Marple's eyes widened. This person had been feeding him information, guiding him, and amplifying the terror in the village. The accomplice paused, unaware of Miss Marple's presence, speaking softly. He must succeed tonight. The ledger must be found, the inheritance revealed, and the rest eliminated. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The stakes had escalated dramatically. The stranger was not acting alone, and the plan was far more extensive than she had anticipated. She retreated quietly, knowing she needed reinforcements, or at least more information before confronting this dual threat. Returning to her cottage, she catalogued everything she had observed, noting the paths, the interactions, and the underlying motives. By late night, she devised a plan. She would set subtle traps, observe reactions, and force the stranger and his accomplice to reveal themselves more fully. The letters, the ledger, and the patterns all suggested that their ultimate goal was within reach. Miss Marple had to act quickly, carefully, and decisively. As she slept fitfully, Her mind remained alert. Dreams were filled with shadows, whispers, and the echo of footsteps on cobblestones. She awoke with a sense of urgency, understanding that the next encounter would be critical. Miss Marple's investigation led her to a shocking discovery the next morning. A secret passage beneath the old Harrington house, hidden behind a false wall. Inside were additional documents, photographs, and letters, evidence that the stranger had missed. But more importantly, the passage contained hints of the accomplice's identity, linking them directly to long-standing village secrets. The puzzle, it seemed, was beginning to unravel, but the unraveling carried risk. Whoever was involved would not hesitate to escalate violence to protect their secrets. By afternoon, Miss Marple had traced connections between the Harrison family, the stranger, and his accomplice. Every piece of evidence pointed to a single chilling conclusion. The next attack would not be subtle. It would be deliberate, direct, and designed to instill maximum fear and chaos. That night, she prepared for confrontation. She positioned herself strategically, observed the village's key locations, and waited. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and smoke, shadows stretching long across the lanes. Every sound, every flicker of movement was magnified in the tense darkness. Hours passed, then a sudden movement, a figure approaching from the woods carrying a small package. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her mind remained sharp. She recognized the stranger immediately. He paused, inspecting the package, then glanced toward the village. Miss Marple stepped from her hiding place, voice calm but firm. "I know what you are doing, and I know who is helping you." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "You are persistent," he said. "Too persistent. But persistence alone will not save them or you." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Every pattern, every step, every secret leaves a trace, and I have traced them all." For a long moment they faced each other in silence. Then the stranger's accomplice emerged, unaware of Miss Marple's presence, speaking sharply. "We must act now. If we delay, everything fails." Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly. The confrontation had escalated to a direct collision between her knowledge and their plans. The stakes could not be higher, and the danger was immediate. By dawn, the village remained unaware of the night's tension, but Miss Marple had uncovered critical truths, the identities, motives, and patterns of both the stranger and his accomplice. The puzzle was far from solved, but she now held the key to anticipating the next moves and preventing further tragedy. The shadows over St. Mary Mead had deepened, the threats grown sharper and the danger more immediate. Yet Miss Marple, calm, methodical, and resolute, prepared for the challenges ahead, determined to bring the full truth into the light, no matter the cost. St. Mary Mead was shrouded in an unusual stillness. The village, once bustling with the subtle rhythms of daily life, now seemed to hold its breath. Windows were shuttered, doors locked, and even the usual chatter of the market square was replaced by silence. The air carried a tension so thick it seemed almost visible. Miss Marple walked carefully along the familiar cobblestone lanes, her eyes sharp, ears attuned to the slightest disturbance. After days of gathering evidence, observing patterns, and tracing the stranger's movements, she was finally ready. The pieces were converging, and the time had come to force the hand of the villain and his accomplice. The day began with her visiting the Fletcher cottage. Mrs. Fletcher remained anxious, but resolute. "Jane, I fear what might happen tonight," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They know I helped you." Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Fear is a tool, my dear, but knowledge is stronger. We have anticipated their moves, and tonight we will act with precision. The shadows may seem impenetrable, but they always reveal their secrets." By mid-afternoon, Miss Marple had instructed a few trusted villagers to remain vigilant, maintaining discreet observation points near key locations: the abandoned mill, the Harrington house, and the village square. Their task was simple: report unusual activity immediately, without confronting the intruders. The plan was for Miss Marple to lead the operation herself, relying on intelligence, observation, and subtle strategy. As twilight descended, the village seemed to hold its breath. The streets were empty, the shops closed, and even the stray cats moved with unusual caution. Miss Marple positioned herself near the mill, where she anticipated the stranger's next move. Every detail had been considered: angles of approach, potential hiding spots, escape routes, and the timing of the shadows. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, a faint rustling from the woods caught her attention. A figure emerged, the stranger, moving with the same deliberate precision she had observed before. He carried a small package and paused near the side of the mill, scanning the surroundings carefully. Miss Marple remained hidden, her eyes tracking every motion. Suddenly, another figure appeared, the accomplice. Miss Marple's mind catalogued the interaction, subtle gestures, whispered words, and the manner in which they communicated without speaking aloud. The accomplice handed over documents, maps, and photographs, revealing a shocking level of coordination. The stranger paused, sensing something, and glanced toward the shadows where Miss Marple had positioned herself. He narrowed his eyes, suspicion flickering across his face. "It seems we have company," he whispered, voice low but sharp. Miss Marple stepped from her hiding place, calm but authoritative. "Yes, I see you, and I know what you are planning." The stranger's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features.
How did you—"
Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Observation, patience, and attention to detail. Every step you take, every choice you make, leaves a trace. And I have traced them all." The stranger's accomplice moved closer, tense, and whispered, "We must act now, or everything fails." Miss Marple's mind raced. The confrontation was imminent, but she had anticipated this. She had positioned herself to leverage the village's geography, the shadows, and the environment itself. Each movement would reveal a weakness, each action could be countered. Suddenly, the stranger lunged toward the package, intending to secure it and escape. Miss Marple reacted swiftly, stepping into his path and blocking his exit. "Stop!" she commanded, voice firm. The stranger paused, evaluating. "You are persistent," he said. "Too persistent. But persistence alone will not save you or them. Persistence, combined with understanding, observation, and patience, can stop even the most meticulous plan," Miss Marple replied calmly. The accomplice tried to intervene, but Miss Marple had anticipated this as well. A swift gesture, a subtle movement of a lever she had prepared earlier, caused a trapdoor nearby to shift slightly, forcing the accomplice to retreat momentarily to avoid falling. The stranger glanced at the distraction, giving Miss Marple the opening she needed. She seized the moment, approaching carefully. The ledger, the documents, the letters. You cannot control them anymore. Your plan is exposed, and your accomplice's role is clear. You have no path to victory. The stranger's eyes flickered with anger, fear, and frustration. He realized that his careful orchestration, his manipulation, and his calculated moves were all anticipated. He had underestimated one factor: Miss Marple's ability to perceive the patterns, connect the dots, and predict human behavior. A tense standoff ensued, each party evaluating the other. The shadows of the mill stretched long, intertwining with the figures, creating a tableau of suspense and danger. Every second was critical, every movement deliberate. Then a sudden sound, the alarmed crow of a distant rooster, startled the stranger. In that split second, Miss Marple acted decisively. She maneuvered to intercept him, using his momentary distraction to force him toward the village square, where the villagers, positioned discreetly, were ready to assist if necessary. The stranger, realizing his plan was unraveling, attempted to flee, but Miss Marple's careful positioning, combined with the village's subtle coordination, left him with no viable escape. He was forced to confront the reality that his carefully constructed strategy had failed. "Enough," Miss Marple said firmly. "The village will no longer be manipulated, terrorized, or controlled by fear. Your plan ends tonight." The accomplice, realizing the plan had failed, attempted to retreat into the woods, but was intercepted by a group of villagers who had been quietly observing as Miss Marple had instructed. Their combined presence left the accomplice with no escape, and the realization of failure was evident in their posture and expressions. The stranger, seeing his accomplice captured and his plan exposed, paused. For a moment, he seemed almost human, vulnerable, a man undone by his own obsession and miscalculation. Miss Marple approached, calm but resolute. "Your pattern, your obsession, your manipulation. It ends here," she said. "You underestimated the power of observation, patience, and understanding, and now you must face the consequences of your actions." The stranger's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight leaving him. He realized that his meticulous planning, his calculated moves, and his manipulation of fear were all insufficient against the quiet, unwavering intelligence of Miss Marple. By dawn, the village of St. Mary Mead began to breathe again. The immediate threat had been neutralized, the ledger recovered, and the accomplice apprehended. The villagers, though shaken, were safe, and the web of secrets, lies, and manipulations had been exposed. Miss Marple, however, knew that the resolution was only partial. While the immediate danger was over, the underlying motives, historical grudges, and long-buried secrets of the Harrison family remained. She would continue to observe, catalog, and ensure that the peace of St. Mary Mead was restored, not just through the capture of villains, but through the understanding and resolution of the past that had given rise to them. The confrontation had been the turning point, a dramatic escalation that revealed the full scope of the danger. The village, once again, would recover, but under the watchful eyes of a detective whose patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve had once more prevented disaster. Miss Marple sat by her window that morning, sunlight breaking through the clouds, casting light on the village that had endured so much. The shadows were retreating, but she remained vigilant. Knowledge, observation, and understanding would always be her greatest weapons, and St. Mary Mead would remain safe under her quiet, unyielding watch. St. Mary Mead awoke to a fragile calm. The air was still, the streets quiet. Yet the events of the past days lingered like a shadow, unbroken and uneasy. Though the immediate threat had been confronted, the village itself remained on edge, and Miss Marple knew that the final pieces of the puzzle, the most critical truths, were still hidden. Morning light streamed through her window as Miss Marple reviewed her notes. The stranger had been captured, his accomplice apprehended, and the ledger of the Harrison family recovered. Yet, even with these victories, there were gaps, unexplained discrepancies, subtle manipulations in the letters, and hints that the stranger's plan had a deeper, more personal motive. She began her day with a visit to the Fletcher cottage. Mrs. Fletcher, still pale from the ordeal, greeted her with a tentative smile. "Jane, do you think it's truly over?" she asked, anxiety still evident in her voice. Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Over in one sense, yes, but understanding is rarely instantaneous. The final revelation, the truth behind the motives, the secrets, and the obsessions, requires patience, careful observation, and insight, and I believe today we will uncover it." Together they retraced the stranger's steps, cataloging every movement, every interaction, and every hidden clue. Miss Marple's sharp mind pieced together the intricate web, the threats, the abductions, the letters, the hidden ledger, and the accomplice's involvement. The puzzle had grown complex, but every thread now converged toward a single, shocking revelation. By afternoon, Miss Marple convened a discreet meeting at the village hall with the Collings, the vicar, and a few trusted villagers. She spread out the letters, photographs, and ledger, pointing to patterns that had eluded notice before. The stranger's actions were not random, she explained. They were motivated by long-standing grievances, personal vendettas, and secrets connected to the Harrison family. Every threat, every abduction, every act of intimidation was calculated to manipulate fear, secure information, and exact revenge. The villagers listened in stunned silence, realizing the depth of the danger that had lurked unnoticed among them. Miss Marple continued, revealing subtle clues they had overlooked. The small scratches on door frames, the displaced soil near the mill, the faint metallic scent, and the intricate coordination between the stranger and his accomplice. "The ledger contains more than financial disputes," she said. "It records betrayals, hidden alliances, and long-forgotten promises that have shaped the village's history. The stranger sought to exploit these secrets, believing them to be his key to control. But he underestimated one factor: human observation, patience, and insight." As dusk fell, Miss Marple returned to the Harrington house, now calm and deserted. She examined the hidden passage where the final letters and documents were concealed. Carefully she cross-referenced each document with her prior observations, connecting dots that had been invisible before. Then came the final clue. A photograph, slightly torn, depicting the stranger in his youth with a member of the Harrison family, an unknown sibling whose identity had been deliberately concealed. The photograph revealed the truth. The stranger's vendetta was deeply personal. His motives were not just greed or manipulation. They were rooted in a family dispute spanning decades. Miss Marple realized the final revelation was imminent. She organized a controlled confrontation at the village square, ensuring that the stranger, his accomplice, and the key villagers would be present. Every detail was anticipated: positions, timing, and the sequence of exposure. As night fell, the square was quiet. Shadows stretched long, the wind carrying the whispers of fear and anticipation. The stranger and his accomplice arrived expecting compliance, intimidation, and continued manipulation. Instead, they were met with the calm authority of Miss Marple. "I know your motives," she announced, her voice clear and unwavering. "I know the depth of your vendetta, the personal grievances that have driven you, and the manipulations you have orchestrated. The secrets of the Harrison family are revealed, and the truth is no longer hidden." The stranger's eyes widened, a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief crossing his features. How can you know?" he demanded. Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Observation, deduction, and an understanding of human nature. You underestimated the power of patience and insight. Your vendetta, rooted in the past, has been exposed. Your accomplice's role is clear, and your plan. It ends here." The accomplice stepped back, realization dawning. Every act of intimidation, every hidden letter, every manipulative move had been catalogued, understood, and anticipated. The labyrinth of secrets and deception they had created was now laid bare before the village and the law. Miss Marple revealed the final connections: the hidden ledger, the photographs, the letters, and the subtle patterns that exposed the accomplice's role. She detailed how the stranger had manipulated fear, but also how his human instincts, overconfidence, underestimation, and reliance on psychological manipulation had left traces. The villagers, now fully aware of the depths of deception, were astonished. The stranger's plan had been elaborate, intricate, and terrifying. But Miss Marple's insight had rendered it ineffective. The historical disputes, secret alliances, and grievances that had driven his vendetta were now fully exposed, leaving him vulnerable to justice. By midnight, the stranger and his accomplice were taken into custody. Their carefully orchestrated plan unraveled completely. The ledger and documents were returned to their rightful place, ensuring transparency and resolution. Miss Marple, seated in her study with the final pieces of evidence before her, reflected on the events. The danger, the fear, and the manipulation had been real, but the resolution lay in understanding, observation, and courage. St. Mary Mead had survived not just because the immediate threat was neutralized, but because insight had revealed the truth behind the shadows. The village once again began to breathe freely. Windows opened, doors unlocked, and cautious smiles returned to faces long haunted by fear. Yet Miss Marple remained vigilant, knowing that history often repeats itself, and that the quiet power of observation is the truest safeguard against deception, manipulation, and danger. The final revelation was clear: secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually surface. Justice, patience, and intelligence will always illuminate the truth. And Miss Marple, calm, wise, and unwavering, had once more ensured that St. Mary Mead was safe. As dawn broke over the village, light spilled across the cobblestones and cottages. The shadows had retreated, the danger resolved, and the mysteries unveiled. For the villagers, peace returned. For Miss Marple, vigilance remained, as it always would. She had confronted the darkness, unveiled the secrets, and restored order, but always with the knowledge that beneath the quiet surface of life, mysteries wait patiently to be discovered.